Gypsy Sorcery and Fortune-Telling. Illustrated by numerous incantations, specimens of medical magic, anecdotes and tales. By Charles Godfrey Leland, President of the Gypsy Lore Society, etc., etc. Preface. This work contains a collection of the customs, usages, and ceremonies current among gypsies, as regards fortune-telling, witch-doctoring, love-philtering, and other sorcery, illustrated by many anecdotes and instances, taken either from works as yet very little known to the English reader or from personal experiences. Within a very few years, since ethnology and archaeology have received a great inspiration, and much enlarged their scope through folklore, everything relating to such subjects is studied with far greater interest and to much greater profit than was the case when they were cultivated in a languid, half-believing, half-skeptical spirit which was in reality rather one of mere romance than reason. Now that we seek with resolution to find the whole truth, be it based on materialism, spiritualism, or their identity, we are amazed to find that the realm of marvel and mystery, of wonder and poetry, connected with what we vaguely call magic, far from being explained away or exploded, enlarges before us as we proceed, and that not into a mere cloudland, gorgeous land, but into a country of reality in which men of science who would once have disdained the mere thought thereof are beginning to stray. Hypnotism has really revealed far greater wonders than were ever established by the fascinators of old or by mesmerists of more modern times. Memory, the basis of thought according to Plato, which was once held to be a determined quantity, has been proved, the word is not too bold, by recent physiology, to be practically infinite, and its perfect development to be identical with that of intellect, so that we now see plainly before us the power to perform much which was once regarded as miraculous. Not less evident is it that men of science or practical inventors, such as Darwin, Wallace, Huxley, Tyndall, Galton, Joule, Lockyer, and Edison, have been or are all working in common with theosophists, spiritualists, folklorists, and many more, not diversely but all towards a grand solution of the unknown. Therefore there is nothing whatever in the past relating to the influences which have swayed man, however strange, eccentric, superstitious, or even repulsive they may seem, which is not of great and constantly increasing value. And if we of the present time begin already to see this, how much more important will these facts be to the men of the future, who, by virtue of more widely extended knowledge and comparison, will be better able than we are to draw wise conclusions undreamed of now. But the chief conclusion for us is to collect as much as we can, while it is yet extant, of all the strange lore of the olden time, instead of wasting time in forming idle theories about it. In a paper read before the Congrès de Traditions Populaires in Paris, 1889, on the relations of gypsies to folklore, I set forth my belief that these people have always been the humble priests of what is really the practical religion of all peasants and poor people, that is their magical ceremonies and medicine. Very few have any conception of the degree to which gypsies have been the colporteurs of what in Italy is called the old faith, or witchcraft. As regards the illustrative matter given, I am much indebted to Dr. Laslocki, who has probably had far more intimate personal experience of gypsies than any other learned man who ever lived. Through our mutual friend, Dr. Anton Hermann, editor of the Ethnologische Mitteilungen, Budapest, who is also himself an accomplished Romany scholar and collector, and who has kindly taken a warm interest in this book, and greatly aided it. To these I may add Dr. Friedrich S. Krauss, of Vienna, whose various works on the superstitions and folklore of the South Slavonians, kindly presented by him to me, contain a vast mine of material, nearly all that of which he treats being common property between peasants and the Romani, as other sources abundantly indicate. With this there is also much which I collected personally among gypsies and fortune-tellers, and similar characters, it being true as regards this work and its main object, that there is much cognate or allied information which is quite as valuable as gypsy lore itself, as all such subjects mutually explain one of the others. Gypsies, as I have said, have done more than any race or class on the face of the earth to disseminate among the multitude a belief in fortune-telling, magical or sympathetic cures, amulets and such small sorceries as now find a place in folklore. Their women have all pretended to possess occult power since prehistoric times. By the exercise of their wits they have actually acquired a certain art of reading character or even thought, which, however it be allied to deceit, is in a way true in itself, and well worth careful examination. Matthew Arnold has dwelt on it with rare skill in his poem of the Gypsy Scholar. Even deceit and imposture never held its own as a system for ages without some groundwork of truth, and that which upheld the structure of gypsy sorcery, has never been very carefully examined. I trust that I have done this in a rational and philosophic spirit, and have also illustrated my remarks in a manner which will prove attractive to the general reader. There are many good reasons for believing that the greatest portion of gypsy magic was brought by the Romani from the East or India. This is specially true as regards those now dwelling in Eastern Europe. And it is certainly interesting to observe that among these people there is still extant, on a very extended scale indeed, a shamanism which seems to have come from the same Tartar-Altaic source which was found of yore among the Akkadian Babylonians, Etruscan races, and Indian hill tribes. This, the religion of the drum and the demon as a disease, or devil doctoring, will be found fully illustrated in many curious ways in these pages. I believe that in describing it I have also shown how many fragments of this primitive religion, or cult, still exist, under very different names, in the most enlightened centers of civilization. And I respectfully submit to my reader, or critic, that I have in no instance, either in this or any other case, wandered from my real subject, and that the entire work forms a carefully considered and consistent whole. To perfect my title, I should perhaps have added a line or two to the effect that I have illustrated many of the gypsy sorceries by instances of folklore drawn from other sources. But I believe that it is nowhere inappropriate, considering the subject as a whole. For those who would lay stress on omissions in my book, I would say that I have never intended or pretended to exhaust gypsy superstitions. I have not even given all that may be found in the works of Leslocki alone. I have, according to the limits of the book, cited so much as to fully illustrate the main subject already described, and this will be of more interest to the student of history than the details of gypsy chiromancy or more spells and charms than are necessary to explain the leading ideas. What is wanted in the present state of folklore, I here repeat, is collection from original sources, and material, that is from people and not merely from books. The critics we have, like the poor, always with us, and a century hence we shall doubtless have far better ones than those in whom we now rejoice, or sorrow. But material abides no time, and an immense quantity of it which is world-old perishes every day. For with general culture and intelligence we are killing all kinds of old faiths, with wonderful celerity. The time is near at hand when it will all be incredibly valuable, and then men will wish sorrowfully enough that there had been more collectors to accumulate and fewer critics to detract from their labors and to discourage them. For the collector must form his theory, or system great or small, good or bad, such as it is, in order to gather his facts, and then the theory is shattered by the critic and the collection made to appear ridiculous. And so collection ends. There is another very curious reflection which has been ever present to my mind while writing this work, and which the reader will do well carefully to think out for himself. It is that the very first efforts of the human mind towards the supernatural were gloomy, strange, and wild, they were of witchcraft and sorcery. Dead bodies, defilement, deviltry, and dirt. Men soon came to believe in the virtue of the repetition of certain rhymes or spells in connection with dead men's bones, hands, and other horrors or relics. To this day this old religion exists exactly as it did of yore, wherever men are ignorant, stupid, criminal, or corresponding to their prehistoric ancestors. I myself have seen a dead man's hand for sale in Venice. According to Dr. Bloch, says a writer in the St. James's Gazette, January 16, 1889, the corpse candle superstition is still firmly enshrined among the tenets of thieves all over Europe. In reality, according to the Standard, we know little about the strange thoughts which agitate the minds of the criminal classes. Their creeds are legends. Most of them are the children and grandchildren of thieves who have been brought up from their youth in the densest ignorance, and who, constantly at war with society, seek the aid of those powers of darkness in the dread efficacy of which they have an unshaken confidence. Fetishism of the rudest type, or what the mythologists have learned to call animism, is part and parcel of the robber's creed. A habit and repute thief has always in his pocket, or somewhere about his person, a bit of coal, or chalk, or a lucky stone, or an amulet of some sort on which he relies for safety in his hour of peril. Omens he firmly trusts in. Divination is regularly practiced by him, as the occasional quarrels over the Bible and key, and the sieve and shears, testify. The supposed power of witches and wizards make many of them live in terror, and pay blackmail, and although they will lie almost without a motive, the ingenuity with which the most depraved criminal will try to evade kissing the book, performing this rite with his thumb instead, is a curious instance of what may be termed perverted religious instincts. As for the fear of the evil eye, it is affirmed that most of the foreign thieves of London dread more being brought before a particular magistrate who has the reputation of being endowed with that fatal gift than of being summarily sentenced by any other whose judicial glare is less severe. This is all true, but it tells only a small part of the truth. Not only is fetish or shamanism the real religion of criminals, but of vast numbers who are not suspected of it. There is not a town in England or in Europe in which witchcraft, its beginning, is not extensively practiced, although this is done with a secrecy the success of which is of itself almost a miracle. We may erect churches and print books, but wherever the prehistoric man exists, and he is still to be found everywhere by millions, he will cling to the old witchcraft of his remote ancestors. Until you change his very nature, the only form in which he can realize supernaturalism will be by means of superstition, and the grossest superstition at that. Research and reflection have taught me that this sorcery is far more widely and deeply extended than any cultivated person dreams. Instead of yielding to the progress of culture, it seems to actually advance with it. Count Angelo de Gubernatis once remarked to one of the most distinguished English statesmen that there was in the country in Tuscany 10 times as much heathenism as Christianity. The same remark was made to me by a fortune-teller in Florence. She explained what she meant. It was the vecchia religione, the old religion, not Christianity, but the dark and strange sorceries of the strega, or witch, the compounding of magical medicine over which spells are muttered, the making love philters, the cursing enemies, the removing the influence of other witches, and the manufacture of amulets in a manner prohibited by the Church. It would seem as if, by some strange process, while advanced scientists are occupied in eliminating magic from religion, the coarser mind is actually busy in reducing it to religion alone. It has been educated sufficiently to perceive an analogy between dead man's hands and relics as working miracles, and as sorcery is more entertaining than religion, and has, moreover, the charm of secrecy. The prehistoric man, who is still with us, prefers the former. Because certain forms of this sorcery are no longer found among the educated classes, we think that superstition no longer exists. But though we no longer burn witches or believe in fairies, it is a fact that of a kind and fashion proportionate to our advanced culture, it is, with a very few exceptions, as prevalent as ever. Very few persons indeed have ever given this subject the attention which it merits, for it is simply idle to speculate on the possibility of cultivating or sympathizing with the lowest orders without really understanding it in all its higher forms. And I venture to say that, as regards a literal and truthful knowledge of its forms and practices, this work will prove to be a contribution to the subject not without value. I have, in fact, done my best to set forth in it a very singular truth which is of great importance to every one who takes any real interest in social science, or the advance of intelligence. It is that while almost everybody who contributes to general literature, be it books of travel or articles in journals, has ever and anon something clever to say about superstition among the lower orders at home or abroad, be it in remote country places or in the mountains of Italy, with the usual cry of, "Would it be believed, in the 19th century?" etc., it still remains true that the amount of belief in magic, call it by what name we will, in the world is just as great as ever it was. And here I would quote with approbation a passage from The Conditions for the Survival of Archaic Customs, by G. L. Gaume, in the Archaeological Review of January, 1890. If folklore has done nothing else up to this date, it has demonstrated that civilization, under many of its phases, while elevating the governing class of a nation, and thereby no doubt elevating the nation, does not always reach the lowest or even the lower strata of the population. As Sir Arthur Mitchell puts it, there is always a going up of some and a going down of others, and it is more than probable that just as the going up of the few is in one certain direction, along certain well-ascertained lines of improvement or development, so the going down of the many is in an equally well-ascertained line of degradation or backwardness. The upward march is always towards political improvement, carrying with it social development; the downward march is always towards social degradation, carrying with it political backwardness. It seems difficult indeed to believe that monarchs like Alfred, Edward, William, and Edward, could have had within their Christianized kingdom groups of people whose status was still that of savagery. It seems difficult to believe that Raleigh and Spencer actually beheld specimens of the Irish savage. It seems impossible to read Kemble and Green and Freeman and yet to understand that they are speaking only of the advance guard of the English nation, not of the backward races within the boundary of its island home. The student of archaic custom has, however, to meet these difficulties, and it seems necessary, therefore, to try and arrive at some idea as to what the period of savagery in these islands really means. Which is a question that very few can answer. There is to be found in almost every cheap book or penny dreadful and newspaper shop in Great Britain and America, for sale at a very low price a book of fate, or something equivalent to it, for the name of these works is legion, and one publisher advertises that he has nearly 30 of them, or at least such books with different titles. In my copy there are 25 pages of incantations, charms, and spells, every one of them every whit as superstitious as any of the gypsy ceremonies set forth in this volume. I am convinced, from much inquiry, that next to the Bible and the Almanac there is no one book which is so much disseminated among the million as the Fortune Teller, in some form or other. That is to say, there are, numerically, many millions more of believers in such small sorcery now in Great Britain than there were centuries ago, for, be it remembered, the superstitions of the masses were always petty ones, like those of the fate books. It was only the aristocracy who consulted Cornelius Agrippa, and could afford la haute magie. We may call it by other names, but fry, boil, roast, powder or perfume it as we will, the old faith in the supernatural and in occult means of getting at it still exists in one form or another, the parable or moral of most frequent occurrence in it being that of the mote and the beam. Of the real and full meaning of which I can only reply in the ever-recurring refrain of the Edda, understand ye this, or what? I was once myself made to contribute, involuntarily, to this kind of literature. 40 years ago I published a folklore book entitled The Poetry and Mystery of Dreams, in which the explanations of dreams, as given by Astromsychius, Artemidorus, and other ancient oneirologists, were illustrated by passages from many poets and popular ballads, showing how widely the ancient symbolism had extended. A few years ago I found that some ingenious literary hack had taken my work, without credit, and, omitting what would not be understood by servant girls, had made of it a common sixpenny dream book. Thus concludes the preface to Gypsy Sorcery and Fortune Telling. Feel free to check out Chapter 1, The Origin of Witchcraft, Shamanism, and Sorcery, Vindictive and Mischievous Magic, coming up next. Also if you liked this video, consider subscribing.